Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Evanson, and I'm a director at the Canadian Urban Institute. And this is our Midrise webinar in which we launch our web portal and Midrise interactive web map. The agenda today is to have Marco Vandermaas from Quadrangle Architects give a bit of a presentation on Midrise. Jonathan Critchley, GIS specialist from CUI, will then give a demonstration of the interactive web map and explain the Midrise database. Then Kathy McDonald from Fontra, which is a residents organization in North Toronto, will talk about the utility of this interactive web map from a resident's point of view. And Edward Nicolucci, from an urban designer from the city of Mississauga, will give a municipal staff perspective. And then we'll have opportunity to discuss, answer any questions that people might have, take some comments, and then we'll talk about next steps. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a project description of our project. The CUI is working with 3 pilot municipalities, Mississauga, Markham, and the City of Toronto, to create a Midrise database, which Jonathan will explain in more detail to you. And this is really an interactive web portal that will provide stakeholders with data on built Midrise projects, initially in the pilot cities, but after the pilot stage, we want to expand this database to include all of the municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe that governed by the growth plan. And so the idea here is to have each of the municipalities work with us to populate this database and really to provide evidence of successful built Midrise projects in the GTHA. I also want to just give a brief indication of our interest in recruiting industry and community partners to help us grow this database in the coming months. So at the end of this, you'll see my email address, and if any of you have an interest in that, I'd love you to reach out to me, and we can talk about how we can work together to expand the coverage of this to other municipalities and to make this a really useful resource for community groups, for elected officials, for municipalities, architects, designers, and builders, everyone in the field. So what I'd like to do now is to turn this over to Marco Vandermaas from Quadrangle Architects to give us just a bit of a talk on the whole Midrise and its contribution to building complete communities. Marco?
Great, thanks so much. I've been given 15 minutes, and as you know, architects love to talk, so I'm going to fill those 15 minutes, but I'll start right away. And so everybody can see the next slide, I assume?
Correct.
So the current Midrise environment, and how does Midrise contribute to city building? So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you about our experience with designing and realizing Midrise buildings. We really feel at Quadrangle Architects that these are very important buildings that contribute positively to city building. So Toronto is going through extraordinary times. We are transforming and building a city. We are building buildings not one at a time, but many at a time. And we are transforming and creating whole neighborhoods, sometimes all at once. I mean, look at Regent Park, for example, or the Pan Am Village. And our buildings are bigger and more complex, and they need to relate to the context and the street that they are situated on. But because these are bigger buildings and more people are involved, we have to get it right. So as professionals, we work with our clients, the consultant groups, and the public to build more complete communities for the future. And where hopefully we can play, work, and live very happy. So I must admit I'm a Midrise enthusiast, and I grew up here. I grew up in the Netherlands. I grew up above my parents' retail store. And moving to Canada was very exciting. I was 16 years old, but it was a huge change where I was used to being able to walk and bike everywhere I wanted to. It was a little bit of a different reality in suburban St. Catharines, where I ended up. So where I grew up, the street was well proportioned to the building fronting it. So I understand that the one-to-one relationship of overall width to the street and the height of the buildings works really, really well. And so when buildings are the right scale, they invite people in and they project life out. So in that kind of context, I want to now talk about our environment. So Midrise is definitely not a new concept. One of our very early projects at Quadrangle Architects was actually involved with making city TV on Queen Street a reality. It was about 30 years ago. And so this old building got a new life as a broadcast studio. And just like the house I grew up in, this converted heritage building is approximately the same size, the same height as the width of the street that it's on. So the building size, the adaptive reuse, and the relationship to the street has served as a catalyst for Queen Street to become the vibrant, vital, and very cool neighborhood that it is today. And this is a perfect example of a mid-rise building that continues to contribute to its environment. This building, throughout the years, is a perfect example of inviting people in and projecting life out. So at Quadrangle, I'm design director. Quadrangle Architects is a dynamic architecture firm. We can't call ourselves young anymore after 30 years, I guess, but it has a portfolio of very diverse projects. So all the projects share one important thread, and that is that they're commissioned by idea-based entrepreneurs. Our clients like to take risks. They think that together we can change a site, a neighborhood, and a city. So what is Midrise? And who really cares? Well, obviously we do, and everybody that is connected right now does. And at Quadrangle, we understand that mid-rise buildings are the in-between scale of buildings. They're bigger than houses, but smaller than towers. Seems obvious, but they support a comfortable pedestrian environment and animate the streets by lining the sidewalks with doors, windows, sort of the active use, including stores, restaurants, service, grade-related apartments, and community uses. So there's quite a lot going on in these buildings, and this I've taken exactly verbatim from the Toronto website. So Quadrangle has developed a way to design these mixed-use buildings that contribute positively to the street that they are on. So this is basically a very typical urban street, 20 meters wide. Most established urban streets are approximately 20 meters wide. The suggested height of mid-rise buildings and the total height of a building along these avenues is suggested to be equal to the width of the right-of-way, which results in at least 6 stories. But in certain places, 11 stories is not unusual and quite appropriate for these buildings. So the City of Toronto encourages mid-rise development along the avenues, and they're indicated here by the dark gray lines. And it has been strong in enforcing a certain way to do it. We strongly believe that mid-rise is possible in many locations. Understanding what these buildings have to offer is an opportunity for designers, developers, and the public to create complete communities that are affordable, walkable, inclusive, and very well serviced by public transportation. So creating complete communities with Midrise is not just possible in established urban centers, but in all places where people currently live, work, and play. And also where people learn, because campuses are also very much a subject for this type of development. So our portfolio is full of great Midrise examples. So over the span of 30 years, we've done many. Sometimes these are infill projects. So with the experience of many completed Midrise building under our belt, we have contributed to the guidelines that govern Midrise development in Toronto today. Many municipalities have adopted similar guidelines to encourage and control Midrise development. I should point out that these are not rules and regulations. They are guidelines, because at the end of the day, there's opportunities in different locations to do something a little bit different. Midrise buildings are important buildings for the city and placemaking. I should point out as well that mid-rise buildings are more complex than low-rise buildings, and mid-rise buildings do not benefit from the economies associated with the repetition of high-rise floor plates. A designated team is essential, and by creating feasibility studies as well as prototyping solutions, and then focusing on effective and efficient, speedy delivery is the key to success. As design director at Quadrangle, I'm joined by a colleague of mine and a fellow associate, Andrea Spencer, who is our Midrise lead. So by organizing ourselves accordingly, we and our clients have benefited from successful projects that have been recognized and contribute positively to their surroundings. Cube Lofts, that is pictured here, was awarded the Toronto Urban Design Award of Excellence a few years ago. This is an important recognition for a more contemporary building within an established urban context. So context matters, and we look at planning documents and have interaction with the public on what is appropriate and complementary. So the relationship to the street and the transition to an established residential neighborhood is important and becomes that balancing act during the design process. But all our hard work results in something quite remarkable. Like Midrise does not just change a neighborhood, it enhances a neighborhood. And ordinary places become extraordinary. So I was struggling with the fact of calling this perhaps tall tales from a wood fanatic, because I'm interested in getting wood construction taller and bigger. So because I've been advocating in recent years that this becomes part of the Midrise conversation as well. So wood is an excellent construction material to be utilized because it's a renewable resource, and we have the best well-managed forest industry in the world. It is said that one mid-rise building can be grown every 7 minutes, which is quite remarkable. And the material is very affordable since we're surrounded by it. So I'm a fanatic about wood construction because I've seen what it can do in British Columbia. In 2009, BC changed the building code to allow 6-story wood buildings. And Ontario has followed suit because it just makes sense. As of January 2015, we in Ontario can build mid-rise buildings with wood as well. And our construction industry is ready and able to integrate the appropriate materials and construction methods. With the change to allow 6-story wood construction, we are prepared to roll out projects with innovative use of renewable materials. The systems and the processes we use are safe, affordable, and effective. So understanding the business as usual approach, we can aspire to find more sophisticated ways of working together. We're quite comfortable building with wood, but many communities have very low densities, but have large footprints. Single-family homes, stacked townhouses, have a larger footprint than 4-story apartment buildings. Adding more people at the front, collaborating on designing and engineering more sophisticated buildings allows for more quality control construction and reduced timeline, and also reduced waste generation during construction. So adding 2 extra stories allows for a more appropriate relationship of these buildings to the public realm, the street that they're on, basically, and provide the opportunity for mixed use and a greater diversity of dwelling units as people occupy them. So Midrise is for everyone. All architects, builders, and developers can get into making Midrise a reality. This is the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. The Places to Grow Act has been around since 2005, and it is trying to limit sprawl and protect the green belt and encourage intensification and urbanization of suburban areas. So many of these growth centers, we have car-oriented development. The suburban streets and road systems are public right-of-ways with large setbacks and landscape buffers. These suburban roads are wide and accommodate cars to take us where we need to go. But not designed for the car alone. Just imagine if we build mid-rise buildings along these public right-of-ways, all of a sudden this public space transforms. Multiple modes of transportation can be accommodated, the traffic slows down, and it becomes a destination rather than a thoroughfare. Midrise, in other words, supports life, work, and play in currently very transient places. We can transform suburban areas and make them more walkable. This project has been recently realized in Mississauga. Hot Condos is the name of the project. Should and could have been 6 stories tall, which would have been quite appropriate in this particular location. We're happy how the project turned out. Market acceptance has given us confidence that people are looking for diversity and are okay to live in wood frame buildings. In fact, a lot of people don't care what it's built out of because they know that we have a very good code. The project is providing more variety and more dwelling units that are accessible and affordable. So as I complete the presentation, the most important thing for Midrise is the consideration of context. Every site is unique and every context is different. Building code change and intensification strategies are something to be enthusiastic about. It is exciting that Ontario has the same ability to now develop mixed-use development that supports pedestrian-friendly and transit-oriented neighborhoods for people that really are efficient and effective to build, and which British Columbia actually has been doing for some time. And this is a good example of it. I hope I've given some insight into what Midrise is and how it can contribute to vital and vibrant way of building and sustaining a community or neighborhood. Building buildings with the right relationship to the width of the street is the easiest way to allow a wide variety of dwellings to coexist in the same place. With providing a wide variety of unit types, a diversity of people is attracted and different modes of transportation emerge. So connecting to transit hubs, as is pictured here, also builds that sense of community and connects each community and neighborhood further. We are currently working on a mid-rise Main Street type of development at the village of Maple, the GO station in Vaughan. So we envision more and more of these kind of complete mid-rise communities to emerge in the growth centers as identified within Ontario's Places to Grow Act. We are excited and look forward to design the buildings to satisfy the potential and together create a sense of place.
Well, thank you very much, Marco. That was very good. Thank you, Marco. what we're going to do now is ask Jonathan Critchley, the GIS specialist at the Canadian Urban Institute, to give a demonstration of the interactive map of that we're launching today in the pilot phase of this Midrise database. Jonathan?
Hi, everyone, and I just want to thank you for attending this webinar. We appreciate that you've taken that time to join us today. I just want to comment on some of the Q&A things that we've been receiving quickly. We will be providing a link for the tool at the end of this presentation. We do plan to make the presentation available. We'll send out an email with sort of follow-up at the end of this sort of webinar. And some people have been complaining about the slides not showing. Not sure exactly what that is from. Just make sure that you click on the tab that starts with Midrise webinar, and you should be able to follow along with the slides that we're presenting. So I'm just going to showcase the web tool and demonstrate the capabilities of the pilot project. Before doing that, I'm going to briefly review how the data was collected. So we approached 3 municipalities for this pilot phase of the project. We developed an attribute list of information that we intended to collect, and then we requested that data from existing residential properties as they're currently built and currently exist. The attribute list was refined over time after discussion with the municipalities, and we developed a better understanding of what is already collected. So I'm just going to briefly go through sort of our end attribute list of information that we collected. So we were looking for information, just sort of location, context. Of course, we need the municipality. We needed the street address to sort of place it, mapping coordinates to place on a map, ward number just for context, sort of the neighborhood and then within the region. We also requested attributes that related to the project description. So this included the builder and developer, company's name, the project's name, the type of development, total cost of construction, site area, gross floor area, building footprint, building height, number of floors, number of units, the tenure, if it was a condo, purpose-built rental, construction type, so there's interest in wood construction for mid-rise developments, so a way of identifying sort of if it's purely wood or if it's non-combustible materials. Parking and loading information, so for example, number of underground spaces, number of surface spaces, and then the loading area. And then approvals and process information, so that included if it required rezoning, any minor variance required, building permit issuance date, and then year project completion date of first occupancy. And we're also looking for things such as graphics, so site plans when the development was approved, the building's elevation, project photo upon completion, and then finally special features, so if it's heritage, brownfield, or greenfield development, and any awards that the development may have received. So right now I'm just going to pull up the tool that we have running here and just sort of do a quick overview of its existing features and sort of what you would expect when you finally get access to the tool. So from that information that we requested from the municipalities, we received data from 2 of them during this pilot process, and that is a total of 305 developments. 293 of those came from Mississauga, and that was from the Planning and Building Department, and then 12 came from Markham Building Department. And this provided the most complete data set that could be collected with restrictions of timeline of this pilot project, and they did their best to match our list of attributes with the data that they already collect. And developments were only included in the database for built residential developments, so ones that currently exist and are currently used, and developments between 4 and 12 stories. So during the time that we were collecting the data and approaching municipalities to sort of engage them in providing this data to us, we're also developing this web tool. And its purpose is to visualize the spatial patterns of built mid-rise developments in the greater Golden Horseshoe municipalities. And it's been designed in a way to facilitate the exploration of the collected data and just to improve the understanding of what built mid-rise developments look like on the ground. The data is stored on the Canadian Urban Institute's ArcGIS server, and it's linked to a custom web map created by the CUI. So essentially the tool is a map with points on it linked to the locations of built developments. It is only accessible using this web tool, and the tool was developed and tested for use on a desktop computer in this pilot phase. So it's not designed for use on a mobile device, just as a sort of warning. If you try to do that, it just doesn't load very well. So just a demonstration of sort of, the initial page will load up with points in the 2 municipalities which we received data for, Mississauga and Markham. You can zoom in like any sort of modern web mapping software and click on a point. The information that was collected that's associated with this development is displayed on the left-hand side of the screen, as you'll see. And only information for attributes that we received data from the municipalities are included in this. So we weren't able to achieve collection of all of the attributes that we were looking for, but this is the best that sort of was available in the timeline of this pilot phase. So as there are a lot of attributes, we decided on this design of the web map just to sort of easily display information on the left-hand side. Some of the things you will see NA, and that just simply was that the information was not available at the time or within the timeline of this pilot phase. And you can easily jump between Mississauga and Markham. If you zoom in to the mid-rise development, you would have an option between 2 base layers, so a topographic base layer and then aerial imagery. And the 2 options just provide a way of viewing the neighborhood context around the mid-rise developments. And finally, we would have liked to include additional imagery. So, for example, we'd approached municipalities requesting imagery of the development as built. And unfortunately, municipalities don't currently collect imagery or that type of information. And during the pilot phase, we just weren't able to identify a good source of imagery. So going forward, it is something that we want to include because an image provides a lot more context sort of how the development looks once it's being built. We explored options such as Google Maps Street View and just determined that it's not up to date. Some of the imagery is blurred and sometimes difficult to get line of sight of some of the developments. So going forward, we plan to update the database and web map tool on an annual basis, and that will include updating and filling in missing information for already included developments in this pilot phase, and then that would include outreach to other greater Golden Horseshoe municipalities so that we can include their data in this tool as well. So I'm done with my portion. As I said, we will be providing a link that any of the participants in this webinar will be able to visit and view that data at their leisure after the presentation. But for now, we're just going to pass off to Kathy McDonald from Fontra, and this is just to provide a residents group's perspective of the use of this tool.
Yeah, I'm Kathy McDonald, and Fontra is Federation of North Toronto Residents Association, and we have over 30 residents associations as part of Fontra. So we're in Toronto, mainly north of Bloor, extending as far north as the North York City Centre area, and from Bathurst to Don Valley. So this is an area that's been undergoing a huge amount of development pressure. So members are currently responding to Midrise proposals. They often see them as bigger than expected, but what they what would see as useful is what would be appropriate for a specific site, and being able to see what would fit on their particular site. So again, the emphasis on context. The City of Toronto has Midrise guidelines and has recently reviewed a number of development projects with respect to these guidelines. Our concerns with these this approach is that the guidelines are kind of like cookie cutter, as a cookie cutter approach and for abstract buildings, and even the reporting doesn't show what the context is. So what would be really useful for residents is to be able to access the inventory to find examples of buildings that would be suitable for their development proposal sites. So they could look at a development proposal and see how other projects would fit. So to understand what the planning framework allows, official plan and zoning, what the current site conditions are, the lot size, road access, and information like that. The description of the inventory that I heard today certainly shows there's a lot of information provided. I think one of the things that appears to be missing, and that's sort of the street view, not just of the building, but the building in its context. And the question is, how do you get that, maybe from the developer? So that would be the key thing residents would want to see from this project, would be to be able to search for comparable sites and to have to be able to check, well, I want to know what the height is, what the lot size is, what the neighborhood is like, etc. And I guess finally, Fontra has a website, and we would provide a link to the Midrise inventory so that residents could access it. But they need to be able to find the information they need, not look through a whole bunch of projects trying to find things, because that's just too difficult for them. So those are the comments that I wanted to make at this point. I think the inventory project is a great thing to do, and its success will depend on how well it's used by a whole range of different users, and residents certainly have their needs and requirements for accessibility. So thank you for being able to make these comments today.
Thanks very much, Kathy. That's very interesting. Particularly interested in the comment about making the database searchable. rather than having to scroll through what we hope will be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects. How do we identify what we need? So that's an important consideration for us to give some thought to as we develop this tool. I'm going to ask Edward Nicolucci from the City of Mississauga to talk to us now about the utility of this tool from a municipal perspective. Edward?
Yes, thank you, Jeff, and thank you to CUI for providing this opportunity to speak at the webinar. I'd like to give a little bit of a brief overview of Mississauga. Obviously, there's a lot of people from all over Canada, so I just want to talk a little bit about Mississauga and how we are planning for growth, the success of a lot of the mid-rise buildings, and thirdly, why we think that this the CUI Midrise database is an important tool. So firstly, as we know, Mississauga is located just west of Toronto. People might be surprised to know that we have a population of 750,000, and it's the 6th largest city in Canada. The other thing that's quite interesting is that Mississauga really has grown right out to its boundaries. That is, a lot of the development, I mean, historically, there's been a lot of greenfield developments, a lot of subdivisions, but Mississauga continues to grow, not necessarily through greenfields, but rather through intensification. So this growth that continues really is through intensification, through infilling of sites, through second-generation growth, and essentially it's higher and better uses of land through consolidation and removal of buildings. So it's important to note that that we have a strategic plan, an official plan that really directs where this growth should happen. The official plan designates growth areas. For example, in the downtown, we've seen a number of towers in the downtown as it continues to grow. And also we have nodes and transit lines and corridors. So these are really the areas for intensification. We're starting to see a lot of high-rise, of course, as I say, in the downtown and the nodes. A lot of low-rise development, towns, for example, in stacks along the periphery, along major roads. But we're also starting to see a good uptake now of mid-rise. And as I say, the official plan really thinks it's notes that these are ideal locations along corridors and transit. Some of the areas that Marco noted would be ideally suited for mid-rise. So on the slide that everyone can see, you can see that we have a number of handsome mid-rise buildings that are built and occupied, obviously. We also have a couple that are in the approval process and a couple that have been approved. For example, the one on the top left has just been recently approved. A lot of issues, obviously, with regards to context and some of the issues that Kathy noted. But it's also important to note that why mid-rise? Well, as I say, it's not a low-rise and it's not a high-rise, and they fit beautifully then into various contexts. Certainly they can be very transit supportive, they fit into existing communities, they contribute to a walkable streetscape, they provide a good variety of mixes and provide a good variety of units often enough. The notion is that we'd ideally like to see more, certainly along the corridors. And one thing that we've heard from developers is that there's always a reluctance, and I guess there's a number of reasons that some of the developers, architects, builders have noted. Some of the concerns that they've raised, for example, is the cost, of course, and getting financing. Parking can be an issue, servicing. Although we are starting to see, as I say, more mid-rise being built, the city certainly encourages this type of development. But at the same time, there's always balancing that with the community needs and other stakeholders. So I'd just like to conclude by saying it's kind of like that old adage that if it's meaningful, then you measure it. And so, like, in other words, if mid-rise buildings are something that we are trying to promote, then ideally you'd really want to track it, you want to measure it, and you want to show how its growth and success is moving forward. So Mississauga certainly supports that. And, you know, I can just think of some examples, you know, where you're having meetings with developers and builders, and I think a very valuable tool to say, this is a comparable site. Here's some examples that have been built, and even for the residents. I mean, you can show concrete examples of mid-rise buildings that have been built. And as I say, it's not a low-rise, it's not a high-rise, it's kind of like something in between. So to conclude, yes, I mean, Mississauga supports the notion of a mid-rise database that has, examples from the Golden Horseshoe area. And I think this would be a useful tool to really encourage mid-rise buildings. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Edward. That's very good. Now, we have an opportunity for about 15 minutes to address some of the questions that people have raised. And I guess the first thing is that in some cases, I think people found that the slides during Marco's presentation weren't loading for them. So that may depend on the processor that you have, or very likely. But we're sorry about that, and we'll have to send that presentation to you, and you can go through it again. Marco, we had a question for you, and that is, how are mid-rise buildings selected for a development space? Does it depend on the space, or does it depend on how much money the developer wants? Can you convince the developers easily? I guess that means, can you convince developers to do mid-rise easily? Do you want to take a shot at that?
Nothing is easy, I guess, is what my answer would be to that. It is a balancing act. The further away you're from an urban core, the harder it is to convince somebody to do a mid-rise building, because there's just certain ways of developing sites that have become pretty much business as usual. Also, the zoning on many sites is not allowing necessarily a higher building that's in relation to the street. So it is about educating, and it's about definitely balancing the return of investment or the time it takes to get some of the approvals. Having said that, like I said in my presentation, there is a certain economy associated with doing bigger buildings, so high-rise, because you have the repeat of the floor plate that in fact pays for the complications that you have to do for accommodating loading and lobby space and perhaps a more complicated retail space. It's just you have all the complexity of a high-rise, but you don't always have the economy or the quickness of time to sort it all out, to educate the client about it. Does that make sense?
I guess another thing that we had talked about, Marco, I think you and I were having a conversation in which we were talking about, there are people who are used to working in wood, and so they've been largely building the single detached home, and now they may have an opportunity to move to a more intensified type of development, and this would allow them to continue to use the knowledge they've gained working with wood to build to add a little bit more density to their skills. Do you see this happening?
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity, but obviously when you know to do things a certain way, and you're making money, you just kind of want to keep doing the same thing, which is totally understandable. But the opportunity is fantastic. but again, that learning curve is a bit daunting. And currently, the townhouses are somewhat of a commodity. They are being built using Part 9 of the building code, which is a little bit less sophisticated, very safe, obviously, and very good quality, because we have a great high-quality building industry in Ontario. But to jump to the Part 3 sort of a 6-story it takes a little bit more people to plan it and to design it. And then, of course, the quality control throughout is something that everybody has to be aware of.
Thanks very much. We have another, all things being equal, how does the price of a mid-rise compare with a single-family home for the consumer?
I'm speaking about this as well.
I guess, Marco. I mean, we don't really have a developer here, but just from your perspective.
The good thing right now, because we are experiencing such a building boom, and the fact that a lot of sites, both urban and suburban, are being considered. The good thing is that it is very competitive out there, and certainly the units are going very fast because there's such a high demand, I think, like I said before, mid-rise buildings are a bit more complex in terms of planning and design and construction, just like high-rise buildings are, because you have to fit a lot of things at the ground plane, to accommodate. But having said that, the market really, kind of dictates the price. So we haven't really seen that it's an issue. But of course, being quicker with getting approvals and more sophisticated building techniques, we can get to a more affordable build. Probably there's opportunity for that.
Thanks. We've been asked, is there a timeline in place for expanding this to other municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe? And then what about for other urban areas in Canada like Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary? Well, we hope over the next year to get more partners and more support from industry and from municipalities. So our first priority is to roll it out in the area that is governed by the growth plan, the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and then so we hope that we will be able to add Toronto, the City of Toronto's mid-rise projects to the database. We are engaged in a conversation with the City of Toronto. A lot of levels, I guess, of approval need to be met, and so it's just taking a little longer than perhaps we would have wanted. But we're very confident that the City of Toronto will participate in the database, and because they are very positive towards mid-rise, as Marco pointed out. They have a strategy, and I know that the Chief Planner is very committed to mid-rise as well. So we hope that that's going to add significantly to the database in this pilot phase, and then we're looking to roll it out over the next year into the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Somebody wanted to know here how many of the Mississauga and Markham mid-rise developments are wood frame construction. Do you know, Edward?
I can't say for certain, but I know that the one development that Marco noted the HOT, which is the 4-story product. I know that obviously is wood. I don't know of any other ones. There's certainly been a lot of discussion, given that it's new legislation, but that, from my knowledge, is the only one that is going to be wood, or that actually is built, and that's the only one that I know of. Yes.
Marco?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of time. The code only has gone into effect January 1st of 2015, so last year. So there's always a little bit of time for people to get familiar. There's a lot of people drawing buildings right now and going through the approval process. And I just need to point out that just because the code allows us to do it, not all municipalities are actually allowing us to go to 6 stories. We are predominantly a city that has tried to intensify with the townhouse development, which is, of course, limited to about 3 or 4 stories.
Marco, we just had a quick question asking if mid-rise buildings can be adaptable. And the example is a mid-rise. Can a mid-rise today become a high-rise of tomorrow?
That is a fantastic idea. I really, really like that. The scalability of that idea is fantastic. Maybe some know our project 130 Bloor. Along Bloor Street, we actually put 7 floors of residential on, I think, a 10-story office building or something like that. Like it was very complicated, but a fantastic feat of engineering. And I think that's very, very interesting. As we evolve and we need to go away from the 2-story to a more sort of robust city building mentality. And yeah, it's making buildings that are scalable is a very interesting idea.
That's great. Somebody gave us we've had a question here on pictures being available on the website. Jonathan talked to you a little bit about some of the explorations that we've done. We got a terrific suggestion from someone in Ottawa looking into Bing, and so we're certainly going to follow up on that. And if I would just ask in the last minutes or so, if people have any suggestions as to how we might improve the database, please email us, and we welcome those suggestions, particularly as we try to make this more useful and user-friendly. We have one last question here. Has the city considered additional benefits for developers who are proposing mid-rise? For example, expedited reviews and approvals, this kind of incentive. Edward?
There's a number of things that we currently have on the books with regards to trying to, I guess, encourage mid-rise buildings, but one has to appreciate that there's so many other objectives that the city is trying to meet, like, for example, social housing and things of that sort. So it becomes a question really of what do you try to incentivize. But certainly there's, limitations, of course, of what we can do with regards to the Planning Act on expediting things and DC. So often enough our hands are kind of tied with regards to trying to incentivize mid-rise buildings. So, yeah, unfortunately, there's limitations on what we can do.
Well, thanks. Well, thank you very much to Kathy McDonald from FONTRA, to Edward Nicolucci from the City of Mississauga. Thank you very much to Marco Vandermaas from Quadrangle Architects. I'd like to thank the Building Department at the City of Markham for their exceptional cooperation, and also to the municipal staff at the City of Mississauga, and to the staff at the City of Toronto, who I know are still trying to be participants in this database. And of course, none of this initiative would have been possible without the support of the Places to Grow Implementation Fund and the province of Ontario. So we remain grateful to them for their support and for making this pilot project for what we think will be a remarkably useful tool to, again, a wide variety of stakeholders, residents, elected officials, builders, developers, and people interested in promoting intensification in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So again, thank you very much for all of your interest and for participating in our webinar today. And we hope to come back to you in a few months with an update on our progress. So thanks again. Bye. Marco?
I'm still here.
Great. Thanks a lot. That was just terrific. And
yeah,
Edward, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Jeff.
It's great. And we'll, I think we should do this every few months.
I agree.
Sure.
Keep it alive. Kathy, signing off?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Bye
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.